I'm Susan Elliott, the news editor of Musical America, and this afternoon we're going to be speaking with Afa Dworkin. Afa is the president and artistic director of the Sphinx Organization, which has done more to promote diversity in the arts than perhaps any group in this country. Since taking over as president, Afa has broadened the scope and the network of Sphinx to include over 60 orchestras, numerous foundations, and thousands of young musicians from diverse populations. Clearly, this is an organization that we need right now. Hello, Afa Dworkin. Thank you for joining us. It's great to have you with us this afternoon.
Thank you so much, Susan. It's really terrific to be here.
Why don't we start by your telling us a little bit about Sphinx and what the organization is and does and like that.
Sure. Well, it's great to be here. Sphinx is a national organization with the mission of transforming lives through the power of diversity in the arts. It's been around for the past nearly 25 years. Throughout the year, it conducts a whole variety of programming ranging from early education to career development to arts presentation, and now also leadership, including administrative leadership and entrepreneurship. Annually, we reach approximately 10,000 people through our programming and more than 2 million in live and broadcast audiences.
Oh, wow. And since the pandemic, how have you been coping?
Sure. Well, certainly the change has been both abrupt and disturbing and transformative at the same time. I'll first credit my team in that we pivoted almost immediately to the digital space, not only in terms of our own work, and the way we've been set up was already kind of very conducive to remote work because we follow a particular system we refer to as ROW, the results only work environment, which permits you to really perform and do your work from anywhere so long as the goals are achieved. So the team was very adept at making that shift. And at the same time, maybe more importantly, we looked at all of our programs and immediately assessed what is and isn't possible kind of right away, because our priority was being able to provide as many services as we can, continue to bolster the mission and wrap our arms around our artists, of course, who have been disproportionately affected during the pandemic. So we were able to pivot our summer program immediately, currently serving nearly 90 students digitally through an intensive, rigorous program. And all of our educational programs that happened throughout the year were also able to pivot into the digital space. Of course, we could do very little about the cancellation of about 16 to 18 performances. And now we're looking again at, of course, not having any live performances during the fall season.
You are based in Detroit, is that right?
We are, absolutely.
And so when you talk about performances, what performances specifically are you referring to?
When I talk about performances, I am primarily referring to about 20 or 30 performances that are done by our various ensembles, touring ensembles, as well as solo musicians. So this past spring and summer, there were about 10 performances or so that were slated to be completed by our various touring ensembles, which include the Sphinx Virtuosi, as well as our quartets and other smaller chamber ensembles, and probably about that many solo appearances, which had to be postponed or canceled by our soloists as well. And looking ahead, typically our premier touring ensemble, the self-conducted Sphinx Virtuosi, our string chamber orchestra, was going to embark on a tour in September. Of course, that can't happen live, and that venues for that tour range from the New World Symphony, to Carnegie Hall, which is where we typically culminate our tour. But all the states in between, really, it's a national tour with a fairly balanced presence.
What about the training programs? How are they being conducted?
Sure. So throughout the year, Sphinx conducts its year-round program in elementary schools of Detroit and Flint, Michigan, primarily. These are group lessons and subsidized private lessons to young people with an average age of 8 who are literally having violins placed in their hands for the very first time, something we refer to as our overture program. Of course, that is something that's really important, near and dear to our hearts, but that had to get interrupted when the pandemic hit. So what we've done is, as much as possible, we've reimagined the program as private lessons to try to continue to provide lessons over Zoom and other visual platforms now. Overture has continued, and in fact, several weeks ago, there was a virtual recital that was given to by dozens of these young people. For the vast majority of them, this is their first public performance. So it was both touching and transformative to see that. For our summer programs, that is heavy with training. Typically, we run 3 summer performance academies. We refer to them as SPA. They're normally held at the Juilliard School and Curtis Institute, as well as Cleveland Institute of Music.
Wait a minute, what is SPA?
SPA, Sphinx Performance Academy.
Oh, SPA.
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. So that's our training program for young people of Black and Latinx heritage, ages 11 through 17, who are already playing string instruments and have a lot of talent and poise, but may not have necessarily the access to really excellent training throughout the year and through the summer. So it's a competitive program, actually highly competitive. And the first chapter of Digital SPA just concluded this past weekend with 3 really excellent recitals, and just really an amazing environment in which these young people were able to listen to one another, support one another, collaborate, and even create a collab project, a video project, where they recorded some music on their own iPhones and then had it all engineered together as sort of this culminative performance. And it was both touching and also just admirable to see.
Talk a little bit about some of the challenges that you've run into trying to transform everything to the online mode.
Absolutely. So some of the biggest challenges are purely technical, in that it's looking at limitations that come with not being able to be with one another to play chamber music and collaborate musically. So their use of technology and some ingenuity on the part of our programmatic team had to come into play. And that's time and resources and research. But I think it's all driven so strongly by the need and the desire among our young students to learn, and also their readiness, frankly. They've been such a resilient family of young people. Much deeper challenges come with our inability to fully wrap our arms around our artists who have lost all of their performances, and where the pandemic has affected Black and Brown communities in deeply disproportionate ways that are still not spoken about enough, and not enough systemic change is being brought about to shift that. But I think what has happened is, we have about 700 alumni, more than 700 alumni in our Sphinx family alone, all of whom lost work. Lost their performances and lost an outlet. Not only is it a challenge from the economic standpoint, but also from the creative standpoint. They don't have one another to perform with, and they have no audiences for whom to perform. So for us, the challenge has been figuring out avenues to overcome that, avenues to give them a chance to perform, express themselves, collaborate with one another, make a statement, particularly in response to the murders and the racial unrest that has befallen our country in a pandemic to which we have not had any recourse or remedy. And I think it's also a deeply emotional time for our artists. So for us, the challenge came with, how do we help empower the artists? How do we give them a voice in a way that gets what they're feeling and what is so important to them out there, while also creating a revenue stream, frankly, for them to be able to perform.
Can you give us a few examples of opening up some avenues for these artists? I mean, artists everywhere are suffering for just exactly the reasons you mentioned, but you're absolutely right. The population that you specialize in is suffering more than most.
Some of the examples of things that Sphinx implemented since mid-March have included our Sphinx Match project, which was really a way for artists to hold their own online fundraisers through teaching, through lessons, through performances, lectures, demonstrations, workshops, what have you, and raise their own money. And then Sphinx would step in and match what they're able to raise to a certain extent. So of course that didn't go a very long way. So that gave birth to the Sphinx Artist Fund, which did not necessitate that artists actually go into the match projects and hold their own fundraisers, but it instead gave them an opportunity to simply apply and get some relief dollars to replace their lost income. So we've been able to do that. And just as evidence of how needed it was, within one day we had more than 60 applications for that.
Yeah.
And then
these are all Sphinx alumni that you're talking about?
Yes,
Yeah.
these are all alumni of various Sphinx programs. In other ways that we've been able to pivot and support our artists is simply to continue to facilitate them being able to teach electronically and digitally and pay them artist fees, as well as give several performances in response to the deaths of Breonna Taylor and all the recent events. There have been several video projects that have been recorded and put forth by our artists, members of the Sphinx Virtuosi.
Can you give us a few examples?
Absolutely. One of the more poignant examples that comes to mind is a recording by the Sphinx Virtuosi.
Right.
They put together a beautiful performance on their own iPhones, then engineered together into what sounded like an orchestra, of a work by Philip Herbert called Elegy. And it's a work that was conceived of back in the 90s and written in response to a violent murder of a young British teen, Black British teen in South Side of London,
Right.
to Stephen Lawrence, dedication to Stephen Lawrence. And they felt it is a work that's near and dear to the orchestra's heart, and they felt that it would be an appropriate artistic expression to put together this elegy along with some video material, and essentially do that in memoriam to not only Stephen, but also in remembrance to all of those victims who have been taken from us too soon before their time unjustly.
Tell me a little bit about how the pandemic has impacted Sphinx organizationally. I mean, did you apply for a PPP loan and all that sort of thing?
Absolutely. So we were fortunate enough to receive the PPP loan, yes, and it was a huge gesture of assistance, definitely, and a way for us to continue to support our staff and be able to be there to empower the team and make sure that they can continue to keep going. So that was very helpful. But without a question, the pandemic has had an indelible effect on our own efforts toward fundraising. Of course, we lost more than 400,000 in earned revenue, and for an organization of our size, that's significant. And then, of course, a number of our funding partners also had to cut or eliminate their support toward the arts, moving it more toward social services. I think one of the ways in which it's been important to Sphinx, for Sphinx to continue to assert its place in our sector, is that we don't consider ourselves or think of ourselves as an arts organization. We think of ourselves as a social justice organization that's working to achieve its mission through the medium of the art, and really achieving equity and justice where it's far overdue, and of course still very urgent and necessary. What's really important is that we not slow down at the moment, because our services, our impact, our programming is probably more needed now than ever before. And actually, in my mind, a great place to start for an opera company or any other presenter is to say, I'm taking a hard look at my entire season and I'm making a commitment to decide what equity means to me. Because if we think equity in the most simplistic of terms, that could be taking 50% of your season and saying, I'm going to make that non-white.
If you were going to be talking to colleagues, given the Black Lives Matter movement, what would you say to them?
I would say it is everybody's fight, and it's a great time for us to move a step or 10 beyond putting something in a social media world that says Black Lives Matter. It is a perfect time for us to get about our business and actually commit to doing something drastically different. And by that, I would mean take a look at your programming, take a look at your recruitment practices, your retention practices. Take a look at where you spend your commissioning dollars and who you engage as these great spotlights in your community when you have headliner performances. Don't be afraid to very specifically allocate a portion of your budget. Start with 10%. Allocate 10% of your budget toward efforts very specifically related to booking, engaging, supporting, promoting Black and Latinx artists, and see where that takes you. But don't do it for like 6 months. Do it, make a commitment, do it for 10 years. I can say for a fact, we can't be excellent if we're not inclusive and diverse and representative. If we don't look like, don't feel like, don't sound like, and don't represent the communities in which we reside, sooner or later, we're going to be irrelevant. I don't want to see that happen. And I think we can really shift things to make a difference. It takes resolve.